The first thing I saw was her face. Not in person, not even on a video call, but in a grainy low-light photograph sent to my phone at 10:43 p.m. on a Tuesday night. My phone buzzed twice, screen lighting up the dim corner of my living room where I'd been half dozing after a 14-hour shift on base. The message had no words, just the image. Grandma alone sitting on a hard wooden bench at the bus station in town, her small frame hunched under a threadbare coat, hands clasped tightly around her purse like she was holding on to the last thing she owned. A paper coffee cup sat empty beside her feet, probably something she'd bought hours ago to keep warm. Behind her, the station looked deserted, not a soul in sight. The clock on the wall frozen at 9:17 p.m. It was winter, the kind of winter where your breath freezes before you can even see it. I could almost feel the cold biting through her clothes, through her bones. And then I noticed something else. Her expression? It wasn't sadness. It wasn't confusion. It was resignation. Like she had stopped expecting anyone to come for her. Like she had decided she would simply sit there until she couldn't anymore. The next text came seconds later from a number I knew all too well. My cousin Mia. I thought you should know. Your parents dropped her off here, said they can't take care of her anymore. I read it 3 times before the words actually made sense. My parents dropped off my grandmother, the woman who had practically raised me, at the bus station, like she was an unwanted package, and they just left. My heart slammed in my chest. Heat rose behind my eyes, but it wasn't tears. It was fury. I typed back instantly. Where are they now? Mia responded. Home? They said Grandma stays here until she figures something out. They don't want her back in the house. My breath came out slow, steady, the way they teach you before a mission. Except this wasn't a drill. This was family. My parents had always been complicated. They weren't the nurturing type. Not to me, not to my siblings, and certainly not to Grandma. But this wasn't just cold. This was cruelty dressed up as practicality. I looked at the clock. 10:47 p.m. I could have gotten in my car, driven the 40 miles to the station, picked her up quietly, and driven away. That's what any reasonable person would have done. But I wasn't feeling reasonable. I was feeling surgical, calculated, military. You see, I'm not just any granddaughter. I'm a Navy SEAL, and when SEALs move, we don't just show up. We make a point. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a group chat labeled Echo Squad. These were my brothers and sisters in arms. The people who had pulled me out of firefights, who trusted me with their lives and earned mine in return. Need a quick assist? Civilian retrieval. 0 hostile threat but high symbolic value. I typed. The first reply came in less than 10 seconds. Where and when? I sent the photo of Grandma and then the address of the bus station. By 10:52 p.m., I had my answer. 5 Humvees, 50 SEALs, fully kitted. We'd roll out in 20. I slipped into my dress blues. Not the camis, not the combat gear, the dress uniform. The one you wear for graduations, funerals, and moments when you need the world to know exactly who you are. The medals lined across my chest weren't just metal, they were proof. Proof that I'd fought harder, endured more, and survived what most people couldn't imagine. Tonight, I wasn't just showing up for Grandma. I was showing my parents and the entire town exactly what they'd done by the time I stepped outside. The night air cut sharp against my skin, but the low rumble in the distance warmed me in a way nothing else could. Headlights, engines, the convoy was coming. The first Humvee rolled up, tires crunching against the frozen gravel. Then another, and another. Soldiers hopped out, boots hitting the ground in perfect unison, forming a perimeter without me saying a word. I climbed into the lead vehicle. Bus station, I said. We moved out like a blade through the dark, and I knew before this night was over, my parents would regret every second of what they'd done. To understand why I reacted the way I did that night. You have to understand who my grandmother is and what she means to me. Her name is Margaret Ellis. Everyone calls her Maggie, but to me, she's always been Grandma. She's 78 years old, sharp as a tack with a wit so quick it could slice a man in half before he realized he'd been cut. She's the reason I can stand on my own 2 feet, and ironically the reason I ever put on a uniform. When I was a kid, my parents weren't exactly present. Dad was always chasing some business deal that usually failed before it started. Mom, she was more concerned with country club politics than actual family. It was Grandma who packed my school lunches, stitched my torn jeans, and sat through every piano recital, even the ones where I butchered the notes so badly the teacher winced. She's the one who told me, "Kiddo, your strength isn't in how loud you are. It's in how you refuse to break." Those words, they carried me through Bud S training when every muscle in my body screamed to quit. But to my parents, she was inconvenient. They saw her as this aging burden, a reminder of obligations they didn't want. They never said it out loud, but the way they sighed when she asked for help, the way they shuffled her off to the smallest guest room, I knew. Still, I thought they had some basic decency. I thought there were lines they wouldn't cross. That illusion shattered 3 months before the bus station incident. Grandma had a fall in her kitchen, nothing catastrophic, but she needed a few weeks of physical therapy. I was deployed overseas at the time, so I called my parents and begged them to check in on her daily. They promised they would. They didn't. By the time I got back stateside and drove over to her house, the place was a mess. She'd been living off canned soup and crackers because no one had bothered to grocery shop for her. Her laundry was piled up in the corner. She tried to play it off. "Oh, I'm fine, sweetie," but I saw the truth in her eyes. That was my first breaking point. I confronted my parents right then and there. They shrugged it off. Said she's stubborn. She won't accept help. They never offered any. That's when I started visiting Grandma twice a week, no matter my schedule. I'd fix her leaky faucet, bring her fresh produce, take her to her therapy appointments. I thought maybe I could balance things out, but my parents didn't like that. They saw it as me interfering with their decisions. I didn't care until one evening when Mom said something that stopped me cold. "You'll understand when you have to manage someone like her. It's exhausting. Sometimes you just need to step away." Step away. She was talking about her own mother. Fast forward to the night of the photo. I'd been on base all day running a training op with my squad. I came home bone tired, grabbed a frozen dinner, and was about to crash when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it almost. When I opened that message and saw Grandma on that cold bench, it was like every ounce of patience I'd ever had with my parents evaporated. I didn't need details. I didn't care about their reasoning. I knew this was intentional. They didn't drop her off there by accident. They wanted her gone, out of sight, out of mind. And here's the thing. When you've served in the military long enough, you develop a sixth sense for mission urgency. You know when something can wait until morning and when it can't. This was the latter. I could have just picked her up, driven her to my place, let the whole thing fade quietly into the background. But that would have sent the wrong message. I wanted my parents and anyone else who thought they could treat family like this to feel the weight of their actions. That's why I didn't just drive over. That's why I called Echo Squad. That's why I decided this wouldn't just be a retrieval. This would be a statement that as the Humvees rolled through the sleeping streets. I pictured Grandma's face when she saw us coming for her. I pictured the look on my parents' faces when they heard the engines outside their house later that night. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace because I knew by the end of tonight, they would understand exactly who they were dealing with. 20 minutes later, we turned into the bus station lot. It was almost midnight. The place was empty except for one flickering light above the bench, and her Grandma was sitting exactly as in the photo, except now she had her small floral suitcase next to her. She looked up when she heard the engines. Squinting against the glare of the headlights, I jumped out before the vehicle even stopped moving. "Grandma," her face softened in recognition, but then her brows knit. "What on earth?" I wrapped her in the coat and poured her tea. She didn't resist, but she kept glancing at the line of Humvees behind me, at the silhouettes of SEALs standing at ease. "Sweetheart, what is all this?" "Extraction," I said simply. She let out a half sigh, half laugh, shaking her head. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic." But I could see her shoulders relax. For the first time in that entire photo, she wasn't alone. She was surrounded, protected. I loaded her into the lead Humvee myself, making sure she was comfortable. She kept trying to tell me she was fine, that she didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't answer. My jaw was set. Torres leaned in. "What's next?" I looked past him down the dark road toward my parents' neighborhood. We make a stop. The drive there was surreal. The quiet little suburban streets I'd biked through as a kid now echoed with the low, steady growl of military engines. Curtains twitched. Porch lights flicked on. People peeked through blinds as the convoy passed. When we turned onto my parents' street, every light in their house was off. I told the drivers to park in formation, blocking the road. The sound alone, 5 Humvees shutting down in sync, was enough to wake the block. Neighbors stepped out onto porches in their pajamas, whispering. I left Grandma in the Humvee with 2 teammates, then walked up the driveway. My boots crunched on the gravel. I didn't knock softly. I pounded 3 sharp hits that made the door rattle. Lights came on inside. After a pause, the door cracked open, and my father's voice came through, groggy and irritated. "Do you have any idea?" He stopped when he saw me. Then he looked past me at the vehicles, the uniforms, the silent crowd of operators on his street. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice pitching higher. I stepped back just enough so he could see the Humvee behind me and Grandma sitting inside, sipping tea. His face went pale. "You left her at a bus station," I said. Not a question, not an accusation, a statement. For a long moment, he didn't answer. He just stood there in his robe, staring at me, then at the convoy, then back at me. "Get dressed," I told him, my voice low. "You're coming outside." He didn't move. That's when I took one step closer. So close he had to lean back. "You are going to walk down that driveway, and you are going to stand in front of her, and you are going to explain yourself in front of all these witnesses. The neighbors, the squad, the town that would be talking about this for years." He knew I wasn't bluffing. The door stayed half open for a good 10 seconds. I could see the war inside my father's head. Pride versus fear, control versus exposure. He'd built his life on keeping family matters private, on maintaining a front. Now that front was about to get bulldozed under the headlights of 5 military Humvees. I stepped back, letting the cold night air flow between us. "Dad," I said evenly, "the longer you stand there, the more you tell the whole block what kind of man you are." His jaw tightened. Behind him, my mother appeared, pulling her robe tighter, eyes darting from me to the street. She looked like she wanted to slam the door shut and pretend none of this was happening, but she couldn't. Not with Grandma watching from inside the lead Humvee, and not with 24 neighbors already gathered on lawns. My father muttered something to my mother, then stepped inside. I heard drawers opening, the shuffle of clothes. My mother lingered, wringing her hands. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. My voice cut through the night. She sat alone at a bus station in the dark because you decided she wasn't worth the ride home. Her eyes flickered with guilt, but just for a moment. Then the familiar mask slid back into place. It wasn't like that, she whispered. Then come outside and explain what it was like, I said. The door closed. A minute later, my father emerged, now in jeans and a sweater. He looked smaller somehow. His posture slouched, though his eyes still carried that hard edge. We walked down the driveway together, the hum of quiet conversations rippling through the street. The seals stood like statues, arms crossed, watching without expression. The neighbors made space as we approached the Humvee. Grandma was looking out the window, teacup in hand. When she saw him, she set it down slowly, her hands resting in her lap. I opened the Humvee door. Out, I told her gently. You should hear this in the open. She hesitated, glancing between us, but stepped down carefully. The cold bit at her cheeks. She stood under the streetlight, that same floral suitcase by her side. Tell her, I said to my father. He cleared his throat, his gaze sliding away from hers. It wasn't safe for you at home. We thought. No, I interrupted. Tell her the truth. You didn't want to deal with her. You wanted her out of your way. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My father shot me a sharp look, but I didn't blink. Grandma's voice was quiet, but it carried. All I wanted was to spend Christmas with my family, my own son. His jaw flexed. You wouldn't have been comfortable. She gave a small, sad smile. Comfort isn't the point, is it? I stepped forward. This ends tonight. You're going to acknowledge what you did, and you're going to apologize. Right here, right now. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His eyes darted to the Humvees, the seals, the neighbors, the smartphones undoubtedly recording. For a man obsessed with reputation, this was the nightmare scenario. When he stayed silent, I motioned to Torres. The seal shifted, not threatening, but unmistakably present. The sound of boots on asphalt was deliberate, synchronized, a language my father understood all too well. Finally, his shoulders sagged. Mom, I'm sorry. The words sounded like they'd been dragged from his chest with pliers. Grandma's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She just nodded once. Thank you for saying it, she murmured. Then turning to me, can we go now, dear? I helped her back into the Humvee. The mission was half over, but my pulse was still pounding. Because this wasn't just about picking her up. This was about showing them and everyone watching that the days of quietly sweeping things under the rug were over. I turned back to my parents. She's coming with me. And if you ever try something like this again, I won't just bring a convoy. I'll bring the press. No one spoke. The seals climbed back into the Humvees. Engines roared to life. The convoy pulled away from the curb, leaving my parents standing alone under that streetlight. The whole neighborhood staring. In the rearview mirror, I saw them shrink into the distance. Two figures in the cold, surrounded by whispers they'd never escape. But I wasn't done. Not yet. By morning, the video was everywhere. Someone in the crowd had streamed the entire confrontation live. It spread like wildfire from the local Facebook groups to regional news stations. By breakfast, my phone was buzzing with messages from reporters asking for comments. I ignored them. I had a different stage in mind. At 10 a.m., I drove Grandma to the town hall. She was in a neat wool coat and a scarf I'd bought her years ago, sitting straight back in the passenger seat of my truck. The convoy of Humvees didn't follow. This time, I didn't need them for intimidation. The damage was already done. Inside, the place buzzed with activity. Council members shuffled papers. The mayor checked his watch. When I walked in, the murmurs started immediately. People had seen the video. They knew. I'd called ahead requesting to speak during the public forum. When they finally called my name, I walked to the podium with Grandma beside me. This is my grandmother, I began, my voice steady but carrying. 3 nights ago, she was left sitting alone at a bus station in the cold 4 hours by her own son and daughter-in-law. There were small gasps in the room. My parents were sitting in the back row. My mother with her arms crossed tight, my father pretending to study the floor. She's 83, I continued. She raised 3 children, worked 2 jobs, and never once turned away family when they needed help. And this is how she's repaid. Grandma's hand rested lightly on my arm, but she didn't speak. I could feel the weight of her silence, a kind of permission to keep going. Family isn't just about blood, I said, scanning the room. It's about showing up. It's about respect. And it's about never ever abandoning someone who's given you everything. The mayor shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure what. I'm not here for sympathy. I cut in. I'm here for accountability. My parents run a local business. They sit on committees. They smile for photos at charity events. But when no one's looking, they left my grandmother to fend for herself at a bus stop in freezing temperatures. My father's face reddened. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. This town prides itself on community, I said. So I'm asking, Do we mean that, or is it just a slogan on the welcome sign? The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the heating system. I stepped back from the podium, but I didn't sit down. I stood next to Grandma in the center of the room, letting the silence grow. I knew how to use quiet, the way it forces people to confront the weight of what's been said. After a long moment, the mayor cleared his throat. On behalf of this council, we condemn the treatment of Mrs. Clark. This is not who we are as a community. He looked toward my parents. You have something to say? My father's jaw worked. He glanced at my mother, then at the cameras. Yes, local news had shown up, drawn by the viral video. Finally, he stood. I apologized to my mother and to the community. It was a mistake. It won't happen again. I didn't smile. I didn't let him off the hook. It wasn't a mistake, I said quietly, but loud enough for the microphones to catch. It was a choice. The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading across the room. When we left, people stopped us in the hallway. Old friends of Grandma's, strangers who'd seen the video. They shook her hand, patted her shoulder, told her she deserved better. Outside, under the pale winter sun, she looked at me with a small, tired smile. You didn't have to do all this, she said. Yes, I told her. I did. Because they'll forget if no one makes them, remember. She didn't answer right away. Then softly, they'll remember now. But I wasn't finished. The public apology was a start, not the end. The headlines weren't about to fade quietly. And I had one more move to make, one that would make sure they never tried to erase her again. 2 days after the town hall, the story had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just a local family dispute anymore. It had turned into a talking point about elder neglect, respect, and what it means to protect your own. Morning radio hosts debated it. A state senator tweeted about it. And my parents? They were getting calls they didn't like from business partners, committee chairs, even old friends who didn't want to be seen standing next to them. I could have stopped there. The apology was on record. The town had seen them humbled and Grandma was safe. But I kept thinking about that photo, the one of her sitting alone at the bus station, the way her hands were folded in her lap, the way her coat looked too thin for the cold. That image had burned itself into my memory, and I wanted to make sure it burned into theirs, too. That's why I called in one last favor from my unit. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, my parents' street filled with a deep rumbling growl of diesel engines. Not one Humvee this time, not 5, but 3 Humvees, and 2 massive military transport trucks. No weapons, no intimidation, just presence. We parked along the curb in a perfect line. Uniformed Navy SEALs stepped out, not armed, but in their full dress blues. Each carried something in their hands. At the center of the formation, I walked forward with Grandma on my arm. She wore the same scarf from the town hall, and for the first time in weeks, her hair was done the way she used to, neat and dignified. My parents were already standing on their porch, confusion written all over their faces. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A few even stepped out onto their lawns. When we stopped at the foot of the driveway, I turned to the men and women behind me. Formation. In perfect unison, the SEALs lined up, 3 to each side of us. Then at my signal, they turned to face my parents. This, I said, my voice carrying across the quiet street, is the family my grandmother deserved the night you left her at that bus station. This is the respect you refused to show her. One by one, the SEALs stepped forward and placed their items on the driveway. A folded blanket, a thermos of hot tea, a pair of warm gloves, an umbrella, a flashlight, a handwritten note that read, "You are never alone." I could see my mother's throat working, her eyes darting to the neighbors, the cameras, the growing crowd. My father's hands were shoved deep in his pockets, but I noticed the twitch in his jaw. Grandma doesn't need your money, I said, looking at them both. She doesn't need your approval. What she needs, what she's always deserved, is your presence, your respect, and when you failed to give it, others stepped in. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the driveway. You can't erase what you did. You can't take back that night, but you can remember it. Every time you see these things, I gestured to the driveway, you'll remember exactly who had to show up in your place. The SEALs turned sharply back toward the street, but before they left, I gave one final command. Honor, as when they dropped to a knee before Grandma. Not for me, not for the spectacle, but for her. The woman who had survived Depression-era childhood, raised a family, worked until her hands ached, and still had kindness to give. The street was silent except for the sound of someone's phone recording video. Then I took Grandma's hand, helped her into the lead Humvee, and we rolled away. I didn't look back, but I knew they were still standing there. My parents watching the convoy disappear with the eyes of the entire neighborhood on them. They would never admit it out loud, but I knew that image, that moment, they'd never forget it. And that was the point. The videos hit the internet before we even made it back to Grandma's place. Someone had filmed the whole thing, the convoy rolling down the street, the SEALs forming up, the gifts being placed on the driveway, the moment they knelt. By the time I helped Grandma inside, my phone was buzzing nonstop. By nightfall, the clip had over 1 million views. The comments section was flooded with strangers from all over the country. Veterans, grandkids, even nurses who worked in elder care. Some were angry on Grandma's behalf, some shared their own stories of neglect and family betrayal, and some simply said, "This is how you honor someone who raised you." The local news anchor called me for an interview. National outlets picked it up. It wasn't about embarrassing my parents anymore. It had become a conversation about dignity, duty, and what families owe to the people who built them. Grandma didn't care much for the attention. She'd laugh and say, "I'm too old to be famous." But I caught her sitting up straighter, smiling more often. The sparkle in her eyes returned. She started baking again. And on Sundays, she'd hum the old songs she used to sing while cooking when I was a kid. My parents didn't speak to me for weeks, but I know they saw the headlines. I know they heard the whispers in church and at the country club. They'd wanted to keep things quiet. I'd made sure the world knew instead. A month later, I got a letter. It wasn't from them, at least not directly. It was from my mother's sister. She wrote that they were rethinking a few things, that maybe they'd lost sight of what family is supposed to be. I didn't respond. Not yet. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Instead, I focused on Grandma. We took drives along the coast. We sat in the back garden drinking tea in the cool evenings. I even took her on to base one day, introduced her to the unit. She laughed when one of the younger SEALs asked if she'd ever considered joining the Navy. And here's the thing. I didn't do all of this just to punish my parents. I did it because I wanted Grandma to see, to feel, that she was worth fighting for. That no matter who failed her, she would always have someone ready to stand up, show up, and protect her. Looking back, I realized that day at the bus station could have gone so differently if I hadn't checked my messages, if I hadn't made those calls, if I'd let my parents' words set the course, but I didn't. Because when someone you love is left out in the cold, you don't just walk past. You turn around, you go back, you make it right, and you make sure the people responsible remember exactly why they'll never get the chance to do it again. To anyone hearing this, maybe you've got your own bus station moment buried somewhere in your memory. Maybe it wasn't about a grandparent. Maybe it was a friend, a neighbor, someone who once stood by you when no one else did. If that person's still here, call them, visit them, show up, not because the world is watching, but because that's what decent people do. And if someone in your life has forgotten how to honor the ones who came before them, well, remind them, loudly if you have to, because respect isn't something you ask for, it's something you give, and sometimes it's something you fight for. This is my story. That was my grandma, and this was the day the whole world remembered her name.